All right, so you want to do a deep dive on this Intel stuff, huh?
Yeah, let's get into it.
We've got a whole stack of articles, reports, all kinds of stuff. And you want to know if you should hold your Intel stock, buy more, or sell it off.
Yep, that's the big question.
And I get it, man, making those big decisions about your investments, it can be a little nerve-wracking, especially when you see a stock that's been all over the place lately.
Yeah, that's for sure. And the thing is, right now, the overall market, it's a bit shaky.
Oh, really?
Yeah, remember what happened back in late 2024 when that S&P 500 dropped 3%?
Oh, yeah, that was right after the Federal Reserve kind of hinted that they were going to slow down those interest rate cuts, right?
Exactly, and that really got a lot of investors spooked, especially the ones who are holding stock in companies that are, really sensitive to those interest rate changes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So like companies like Intel?
exactly. Intel is definitely one of those companies that's really sensitive to interest rates.
Okay, so how has Intel been doing with all this market craziness?
Honestly, not so great. Intel stock is down 33% in the last 6 months, and even more over the past year.
Well, how much?
Over the past year, it's down a whopping 54.66%.
Ouch. Okay, so what's going on with Intel? What's the reason for this big drop?
Well, there are a few factors at play, but one of the biggest ones is competition.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I know Intel has some pretty tough rivals out there.
Yeah, they do. Companies like AMD are really putting the pressure on Intel right now. Their chips are really competitive in terms of performance and price.
Okay, so AMD's a big one, but weren't there also some talks about the U.S. maybe putting some restrictions on exports of those super advanced AI chips that Intel makes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's another big factor that's weighing on Intel's stock price right now. There's this possibility that the U.S. government could put restrictions on exports of those chips.
Yeah, I remember reading something about that in one of these research reports from J.P. Morgan Chase. I think they were talking about how it could potentially impact Intel's sales to data centers.
Exactly. Data centers are a huge market for Intel, so any restrictions on exports to those data centers would be a major blow.
Got it. So Intel is dealing with some fierce competition and now this potential roadblock from export restrictions.
Yeah.
But hold on, I'm also seeing some chatter about Intel's upcoming earnings report. Could that be a turning point for them?
Maybe. It's definitely possible. There are actually a few analysts out there who are predicting some pretty decent revenue growth for Intel, especially in their foundry business.
Foundry business? Okay, hold on a sec. I need a little refresher here. What exactly is the foundry business again?
Oh, yeah, good point. So basically, Intel doesn't just make their own chips. They also manufacture chips for other companies. That's their foundry business.
Oh, okay, so they're like a chip-making factory for hire.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And right now, that business is booming because everyone wants AI chips.
Ah, that makes sense. So everyone's jumping on the AI bandwagon and they need Intel to make those chips for them.
Exactly. And that's why some analysts are feeling pretty optimistic about Intel's upcoming earnings report. They think that this surge in demand for AI chips could really boost Intel's revenue.
Okay, so that's interesting. So the question is this AI boom enough to outweigh all those other challenges we talked about? The
Yeah.
competition and the export restrictions.
Right. That's the big question. And honestly, analysts are kind of divided on this. One hand, you have those who think the foundry business could be Intel's saving grace.
And on the other hand,
On the other hand, you have those who are worried that the competition and the export restrictions are just too much to overcome, at least in the short term.
okay, so it's like a tug of war.
Exactly. A tug of war between the optimists and the pessimists.
So Intel is trying to carve out a space for themselves in the AI chip-making world. Are they coming up with new chips specifically for AI?
Yes, definitely. They're working on a bunch of AI-specific products, both hardware and software.
So like what kind of hardware are they developing?
Well, they're designing new chips that are optimized for all sorts of AI tasks, things like machine learning and deep learning.
Ah, okay. So these chips are specifically built to handle all those complex AI calculations.
Exactly. And then on the software side, they're developing all sorts of tools to help developers, actually create and deploy AI applications on Intel's platform.
So it's like a one-stop shop for all your AI needs.
Pretty much. They're trying to make it as easy as possible for developers to build and run AI applications using Intel's technology.
Smart move.
Oh.
But they're not the only ones in this race, right? They've got some serious competition to worry about.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The big one is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC.
Ah, yeah, I've heard of them. They're like the current king of the chip-making world, right?
Exactly. They're the leader in the foundry business, the company that everyone else is trying to catch up to.
So how's Intel planning on catching up to TSMC?
Well, they're doing a few things. They're investing a ton of money in expanding their manufacturing capacity, and they're also pouring resources into developing new technologies, trying to leapfrog ahead.
That makes sense. But is all that going to be enough? There was this report I read from McKinsey that was suggesting that this whole chip rivalry could actually lead to a global oversupply of chips in a few years.
Yeah, I saw that report too. And if that happens, it would definitely complicate things for Intel even more.
Wow. So there's a lot riding on Intel's strategy here. It's like they're trying to thread a needle.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They need to figure out how to stay ahead of the competition while also dealing with all this uncertainty in the market.
So back to those potential export restrictions. How are they planning to deal with that?
It's tricky. There was this analyst report that mentioned that Intel is looking into ways to modify their AI chip so they can comply with the restrictions.
Oh, really? Like how?
Well, one idea is to maybe limit certain processing capabilities of the chips so they're not quite as powerful.
So basically make them a little less powerful so they're not seen as a threat.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's still early days, though. Nobody really knows for sure how these restrictions are going to play out in the long run.
Okay, so it sounds like Intel is walking a tightrope. They're trying to stay competitive in this AI market while also navigating all these geopolitical challenges.
Exactly. And that's why investors are watching so closely. They want to see how Intel manages to balance all these competing priorities.
Okay, so we've got the stage set here. Intel's facing some tough competition. They're dealing with these potential export restrictions, but their foundry business could be their saving grace. So what should our listener be looking for in that earnings report? What are the key numbers they should be paying attention to?
Well, first and foremost, they should look at those foundry revenue numbers. Did Intel meet or even exceed those analysts' expectations?
Right, because if those foundry numbers are strong, it would be a pretty good indicator that they're on the right track.
Exactly. And it would show that they're really capitalizing on that huge demand for AI chips.
Okay, so foundry revenue is number one. What else should they be keeping an eye on?
They should also pay close attention to any announcements about new partnerships or investments in AI-specific technologies.
Okay, so basically anything that shows that Intel is serious about making a long-term commitment to AI.
Right, because that's what investors want to see. They want to know that Intel is in it to win it.
And I think that makes sense for any company that's trying to make a big splash in a new market.
Yeah, for sure. You got to show that you're committed and that you're willing to put your money where your mouth is.
Okay, so we've got the optimists who are excited about the potential of that foundry business. But let's be real. There are some folks out there who are not so bullish on Intel. Some analysts are actually downgrading their price targets.
Yeah, that's true. And it's understandable why some analysts are feeling hesitant about Intel. I mean, they're facing some pretty serious challenges right now.
Like, what are some of the specific concerns that those analysts have?
Well, one of the main concerns is competition. AMD is really eating into Intel's market share. And some analysts just don't see how Intel is going to turn that around.
So they're basically saying that AMD is just too far ahead at this point.
Pretty much. And then there's the issue of those potential export restrictions. Some analysts are really worried about the impact those could have on Intel's business, especially their sales to China.
Yeah, we talked about that. And that whole situation is just so uncertain. It's like a big question mark hanging over Intel's future.
Exactly. And then you have to factor in the overall volatility of the tech market. Tech stocks have been all over the place lately, and that makes it really hard to predict what's going to happen next.
Yeah, so it's like trying to predict the weather.
Yeah.
It could be sunny one day and stormy the next.
Exactly. So it's no wonder that some analysts are feeling a bit cautious about Intel right now.
So we've got the pessimists in one corner.
Right.
Then you have the other side of the coin. What are the optimists saying? Why are they still bullish on Intel?
Well, the optimists believe that Intel is currently undervalued. They think that the market is not giving Intel enough credit for their strengths.
Okay, so what are some of those strengths that the optimists are focusing on?
Well, first of all, Intel has a very strong brand. They've been around for decades, and they have a reputation for producing high-quality products.
Yeah, that's true. Intel is a household name.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they also have this massive global manufacturing capacity. They have factories all over the world, which gives them a big advantage over some of their competitors.
Okay, so strong brand, global manufacturing. Anything else?
Yeah, they also have a lot of expertise in chip design. You know, they've been doing this for a long time, and they have a deep understanding of the technology.
So the optimists are basically saying that Intel has all the ingredients they need to succeed.
Exactly. They just need to figure out the right recipe.
And they're betting that Intel will figure it out.
That's right. They're betting that Intel will be able to overcome these short-term challenges and emerge as a leader in the long run.
So it's a classic battle of perspectives. The pessimists are focused on the risks. The optimists are focused on the potential.
Exactly. And both sides have valid points.
So where do you land in all this?
Honestly, I think it's too early to say for sure. I'm kind of in the cautiously optimistic camp.
Cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
I like that. So what should our listener do with their Intel stock? Should they hold it, buy more, or sell it off?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And I know our listener wants an answer.
I know. But honestly, I think it's too early to make a definitive call on that. We need more information.
Okay, so we need more information, and that's where that earnings report comes in.
Exactly. That earnings report is going to give us a much better idea of how Intel is actually performing and what their plans are for the future.
Right, so we're all on the edge of our seats waiting for this earnings report to drop. It sounds like it's going to be a major turning point for Intel. In the meantime, what should our listener be focusing on? What information is going to be most crucial in helping them decide what to do with their Intel stock?
Well, I think there are 3 key things to watch for.
Okay, hit me with those 3 things.
Right. Number 1, foundry revenue. We need to see if those foundry numbers are as strong as some analysts are predicting.
Right, because if they are, it would be a pretty good sign that Intel is on the right track.
Exactly. Okay. Number 2, AI strategy. We need to hear what Intel's leadership has to say about their long-term plans for AI.
Okay, so we're looking for signs that they're all in on AI.
Exactly. We want to see that they're making big investments and forming key partnerships.
Because that would show that they're serious about becoming a major player in the AI space.
Right. And then the third thing to watch is how the market reacts to the earnings report.
Okay, so we're talking about investor confidence here.
Exactly. We need to see if the market is buying into Intel's story. Does the stock price go up after the earnings report, or does it continue to slide?
Got it. So those are the 3 things to watch: foundry revenue, AI strategy, and market reaction.
Exactly. Those 3 factors will give us a much clearer picture of what the future holds for Intel.
All right, so that's our homework for the next few weeks. Keep an eye on those 3 things, and then we'll come back and revisit this whole Intel situation once we have a little more information.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so until then, happy investing, everyone.
And stay tuned.
We'll be back soon with more deep dives into the world of finance.
And all the stuff that makes your money go up or down.
Or sideways, or maybe even in a circle. Who knows?
Hey, never know with the stock market.
That's the truth. All right, we'll see you next time.
See ya.
All right, so we've got the lay of the land here. You know, Intel's got this huge potential in the AI world, but they're also facing some pretty big challenges too.
Right, exactly.
But let's zero in on this earnings report that's coming up. It feels like everyone's holding their breath waiting to see what it's going to say.
Oh yeah, it's a big one for sure. This is a make or break moment for Intel.
Totally. So what are the analysts thinking? What are they predicting for this earnings report?
Well, the general consensus is that Intel is going to report revenue of around $15.17 billion for the last quarter.
$15.17 billion. Okay, so what does that tell us if they actually hit that number?
Well, it would actually be a pretty decent amount of growth compared to what they've been doing in recent quarters.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it would be a good sign, you know? It would suggest that they're at least holding their own in this tough market.
Right, okay, so overall revenue growth, that would be positive.
Yeah.
But we also need to keep a close eye on those foundry numbers, right? That's where all the exciting AI stuff is happening.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting.
Oh, how so?
Well, there's a Bernstein research report that I was looking at, and they're predicting that Intel's foundry revenue could jump by as much as 15% this quarter.
Ooh, 15%. That's a huge jump.
It is. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And it just shows how much demand there is for those AI chips right now.
Yeah, that's incredible. So if they actually hit that 15% growth in their foundry business, that would be a real game changer, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
It would mean that their strategy of focusing on the foundry business is actually starting to pay off.
And it would put them in a much stronger position to compete with TSMC.
Right, exactly. Because right now, TSMC is the dominant player in that market.
But we got to be realistic here too, right?
Yeah.
Even if this earnings report shows some amazing foundry revenue, it doesn't necessarily mean that Intel is totally out of the woods yet.
No, you're right. There are still a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty surrounding Intel.
Like what, for example?
Well, we can't forget about those potential export restrictions that we talked about.
Oh, right. Those, yeah.
Yes.
How could those restrictions potentially impact Intel's foundry business specifically?
Well, think about it. Those restrictions could really limit Intel's ability to sell their most advanced AI chips to certain customers, especially those in China.
Right, especially China.
Yeah.
Yeah, because China's a huge market for these kinds of chips.
Huge. And actually, according to a report from the Semiconductor Industry Association, China makes up something like 25% of global semiconductor demand.
Wow, 25%. So losing access to that market would be a pretty big blow to Intel's foundry business.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It'd be a significant hit.
So even if their foundry business is doing great right now, those export restrictions could really throw a wrench in things down the line.
Yeah, it's a tough situation.
It's like they're walking a tightrope, you know? They need to figure out how to stay competitive in this AI market while also dealing with all these geopolitical challenges.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act.
And that's got to be tough for investors too, right? Trying to weigh the potential of that foundry growth against this very real threat of those export restrictions.
Oh, absolutely. Investors are definitely in a tricky spot right now. There are just so many factors to consider.
And that's why this earnings report is so important. It's going to give us a lot more clarity on how Intel is managing all these different forces, pulling them in different directions.
I agree. And beyond just the numbers themselves, investors are also going to be paying very close attention to what Intel's leadership says about their long-term strategy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Because the numbers will tell us how they're doing right now in the short term, but we also need to understand their vision for the future.
Exactly. What's their plan? How are they going to navigate all these challenges and come out on top?
So what kind of signals should investors be looking for? What should they be listening for?
I think the most important thing is to look for signs that Intel is really doubling down on their commitment to AI. You know, are they announcing new partnerships with other big players in the AI space?
Oh, yeah. Like who?
Like companies like Google or Microsoft or Amazon, the big tech giants that are really driving a lot of the innovation in AI.
Right. Okay, so new partnerships, that's one thing. What else?
They should also be looking for announcements about new investments. Is Intel putting a lot of money into developing new AI-specific technologies?
So basically, we want to see that they're not just dipping their toes in the AI pool here. We want to see them doing a cannonball.
Exactly. We want to see that they're committed to being a leader in this space, not just a follower.
Because the competition is fierce, right?
Oh, yeah, it is. You've got companies like NVIDIA that are already established giants in the AI world, and they're not going to just roll over and let Intel take their market share.
So Intel's got to fight for their spot at the table here. And they've got to show that they're not just capable of producing those cutting-edge AI chips, but that they can also innovate and adapt to this rapidly changing market.
Right. They need to prove to investors that they're not just relying on their past successes. They need to show that they're actively shaping the future of AI.
Okay, so we've got the foundry numbers, we've got their long-term strategy, and then, of course, we've got that all-important market reaction. So how much weight should investors really give to how the market responds to this earnings report?
Well, I think it's definitely an important factor to consider, but it shouldn't be the only factor.
Oh, why not?
Well, because the market can be pretty fickle sometimes. It can overreact to good news and it can overreact to bad news.
So you're saying don't panic if the stock dips after the earnings report, and don't get too excited if it suddenly surges.
Exactly. Take a deep breath and look at the bigger picture. Consider those foundry numbers, consider Intel's long-term strategy, and look at the overall context of the market. What's happening with the economy, what's happening with interest rates. All those things play a role.
Don't make any rash decisions based solely on the initial market reaction.
Right. Give it some time. Let things settle a bit before you make any big moves.
That's great advice. It's so easy to get caught up in the hype and the emotion of it all.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But it's important to try to step back and analyze things calmly and rationally.
So we talked about the optimists and the pessimists and their different perspectives on Intel's future. Let's dig a little deeper into those viewpoints and try to understand what's really driving those different opinions.
Okay, sounds good to me. Let's do it.
All right, so we've talked about the potential upsides, the things that could really make Intel shine. And we've also talked about those very real challenges that they're up against.
Yep, we've covered a lot of ground.
But now I kind of want to zoom in on those analysts, the folks who spend all their time trying to predict, what's going to happen with companies like Intel.
The fortune tellers of the financial world.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like they're pretty divided on Intel's future. Some are waving those red flags, warning investors to be careful.
Right, and others are seeing dollar signs. They think Intel's about to hit it big.
It's like we've got two camps here. Team cautious and team bullish.
Yeah, good way to put it.
So let's start with team cautious. What are they so worried about when it comes to Intel? What are their big concerns?
Well, one of the most vocal skeptics out there is Morgan Stanley.
Oh yeah, Morgan Stanley, I've heard of them. They're a pretty big deal in the finance world, right?
Yeah, they're a major player.
Hmm.
And they recently downgraded Intel's price target.
Price target. So basically they're saying they don't think Intel's stock is going to go up as much as they thought it would.
Right, exactly. And their main reason for doing that is they're just not convinced that Intel can regain market share from AMD.
Ah, AMD again. So they're basically saying that AMD is going to continue to dominate.
Yeah, pretty much. They think AMD's chips are just more competitive right now in terms of performance and price.
Okay, so competition from AMD, that's a big one for Team Cautious. What else are they worried about?
They're also really concerned about those potential export restrictions, the ones we talked about earlier that could limit Intel's ability to sell their AI chips to certain countries.
Especially China.
Especially China, yeah. There was a report from Goldman Sachs that I was reading, and they basically said that those export restrictions could be a major roadblock for Intel.
Yeah, I can see why they'd be worried about that. The whole situation is just so uncertain.
Yeah, it is. It's like a big question mark hanging over Intel's future.
So we've got competition from AMD. We've got those potential export restrictions. Anything else that's keeping Team Cautious up at night?
Well, they're also pointing to the overall volatility of the tech market. Tech stocks in general have been pretty unpredictable lately.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
It's been a wild ride.
And some analysts think that this volatility makes it really hard to figure out what Intel is actually worth right now.
So it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. The landscape is constantly shifting.
Okay, so to recap, Team Cautious is worried about competition from AMD. They're worried about those export restrictions, and they're worried about the overall instability of the tech market. Not exactly the most comforting thoughts for Intel investors.
No, not really.
But let's shift gears for a second and talk to Team Bullish. The folks who are still feeling pretty optimistic about Intel's future.
Yeah, the folks who are wearing those rose-colored glasses.
So why are they so bullish? What are they seeing that Team Cautious is missing?
Well, the main argument is that Intel is undervalued right now.
Undervalued, meaning that their stock price is lower than it should be.
Exactly. They think that the market is overlooking Intel's strengths.
Okay, so what are some of those strengths that Team Bullish is focusing on?
Well, for starters, Intel has a very strong brand. They've been around for a long time and people trust their products.
Yeah, Intel is a household name.
Yeah.
It's like the Kleenex of computer chips.
Yeah, exactly. And they also have this massive global manufacturing capacity. They have factories all over the world.
Right, which gives them a huge advantage in terms of production and distribution.
Exactly. And then on top of that, they have a ton of experience in chip design. They've been doing this for decades, and they really know what they're doing.
So Team Bullish is basically saying that Intel has all the tools they need to succeed.
Yeah, that's pretty much their argument. They just need to put those tools to good use.
And they're betting that Intel will figure it out.
That's right. They're confident that Intel will overcome these short-term challenges and come out on top in the long run.
So it's all about perspective, right? Team Cautious is focused on the immediate risks, while Team Bullish is looking at the long-term potential.
Exactly. And both sides have valid points.
So where does that leave our listener? The person who's trying to decide what to do with their Intel stock, buy more, sell, hold. What's the best move?
I know they want a clear-cut answer.
A crystal ball prediction.
Exactly, but unfortunately I don't have one.
Yeah, those things are hard to come by.
But I think the most important thing for our listener to do is to be informed, really understand the situation before making any decision.
Okay, that makes sense. Be informed. But what does that actually look like in this case? What should our listener be doing?
Well, first of all, they need to understand the risks. They need to be aware of the competitive pressure from AMD, the potential impact of those export restrictions, and the overall volatility of the tech market.
So don't just skim the headlines. Do your homework.
Exactly. Really dig into the details and try to understand the nuances of the situation.
Okay, so acknowledge the risks. What's next?
Well, they also need to recognize Intel's strengths.
Yeah.
They have a long history of innovation, a global reach, and a deep understanding of the semiconductor industry. It's not like there's some fly-by-night company that's going to disappear tomorrow.
So they've got a solid foundation to build on.
Exactly. And then finally, they need to pay very close attention to that upcoming earnings report.
Ah, yes, the earnings report. The moment of truth.
Exactly. And don't just focus on the top-line revenue number. Dig a little deeper. Look at the specifics of those foundry numbers. Really listen to what Intel's leadership says about their long-term AI strategy and see how the market reacts. Watch how the stock price moves in the days and weeks after the report is released.
So basically, those three things we talked about before, foundry revenue, AI strategy, and market reaction.
Exactly. Those are the key indicators to watch.
Okay, so it's not about blindly following Team Cautious or jumping on the Team Bullish bandwagon.
Yeah.
It's about understanding both sides of the story and then making a decision that aligns with your own investment goals and your own risk tolerance.
Right on the money.
And at the end of the day, investing is a marathon, not a sprint.
That's a great way to put it.
So to our listener out there, here's your mission. Do your research, stay informed, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And hey, maybe one day you'll be the one offering expert insights on the future of the tech world.
I'll be listening.
All right, folks, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive on Intel.
It's been a pleasure.
Always a good time. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.